Look, Yoel Romero was released by the UFC last week. He signed with Bellator this week. The reason why I'm making this video now is I've just seen his interview with Ariel Helwani on YouTube. And I found it quite interesting because a lot of people had a lot to say about his release last week and just saying, oh, the UFC shouldn't have released him. He's a top fighter. Why they getting rid of him? Blah, 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 etc., etc., etc. But we hadn't heard Yoel Romero's side of the story. So in this interview, he disclosed what he feels happened and what led to his release from the UFC. So it all boils down to his next opponent, basically. So he wanted a top level ranked opponent as his next fight in the UFC. He was happy to fight at either middleweight or light heavyweight. And if it was going to be at light heavyweight, he wanted the winner of Santos or Glover Teixeira. And if it was going to be at middleweight, he wanted a big name, basically. The UFC weren't willing to give him this. At middleweight, they wanted him to fight Uriah Hall or Derek Brunson, and at light heavyweight, I can't remember, but I think they kind of offered him Johnny Walker, and those are opponents that he deemed weren't at his level. Now, for me, from my point of view personally, when the news was announced of his release, I understood it. I'm not saying it was a good decision. I'm not saying it was a bad decision. What I'm saying is I understood the thought process behind the decision. Yoel Romero has had a number of challenges for the middleweight title, and he hasn't won one yet. His last one was perhaps his worst performance, not only in a title fight, but just as a mixed martial artist in the UFC. Now, I know the level of opposition he was up against was top caliber, but he was very, very gun-shy in that fight. He just went and stood in the middle of the octagon, and that was just one of the most boring title fights known to mankind. Do you know what I mean? And if that's your last fight, and that's what you've got as your bargaining power, you're on a hide into nothing. Like, if that is what you're saying, look, like when it comes to combat sports, right, you fight 2, 3, 4 times a year if you're Kevin Holland, right? And your last fight is basically your biggest chip when it comes to negotiating with the UFC. And if you're negotiating with the UFC off the back of a performance like that, you literally have next to no power. You can't really throw any weight around because that's what you gave him the last time you fought. So for him to be released, I understood it, and I understood his position. If you're not going to value yourself, who is? He valued himself as still a top level athlete, and he wanted the opportunity to prove it. The UFC just weren't willing to provide that opportunity. So they parted ways. It's amicable. Fine. Good. Well done. Now that he's at Bellator, I should say, there's a lot of talk about Yoel Romero facing Rumble Johnson as both of their debut fight in Bellator. Now, look, I want to see this fight. I want to see this fight as much as the next man. But what I don't want to do is see it first. And the reason why I don't want to see it first is Rumble Johnson ain't fought in, 2 years, 3 years? I don't know. I can't remember off the top of my head. And Yoel Romero hasn't fought at 205 as far as I can remember. In the last... I don't think he's ever fought at 205 in the UFC. So let me just Google this before I commit to that. Give me 2 ticks. Bear with me, caller. Let's have a look. Paulo Costa, no. Rob, no. Luke, no. Weidman, no. Machida, no. So these are all middleweight fights, I believe. Yeah, I don't think he's ever fought a light heavyweight in the UFC. Now, we all know he's a big middleweight, and he's a guy that a lot of people have said over the years that he should be fighting at light heavyweight. And like I said, I want to see him fight Rumble Johnson, but I haven't seen him fight at light heavyweight yet, and I haven't seen Rumble Johnson fight in a couple of years. So what I'd much prefer is for those two guys to fight top. I say top, but it's Bellator, but fight ranked opponents in their debuts. You've got, Phil Davis, you've got Liam McGeary, you've got, I wouldn't count Melvin Manhoef, you've got Alicio Sakara. I don't know if he's retired or not. These rankings don't seem very up to date for me. But Corey Anderson is a name that I'd like to see one of them fight. Machida is another possible opponent. You got Liam McGeary as a possible opponent. You got Phil Davis as a possible opponent. You got Ryan Bader, who's coming off a loss, as a possible opponent. You got Vadim Nemkov, who's obviously the champion at the moment. I'd like to see Nemkov fight someone. I'd like to see Yoel fight a different opponent and Rumble Johnson to fight a different opponent, and then I'd like to see them two fight each other should they win, and then go in for a title shot against Nemkov at the end of the year. That's how I personally would book it. But the problem is, if that was to happen, you need to keep Nemkov active, and if you want to keep him active, then it's a bit like, well, the roster's a little bit thin. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've seen a lot of people talking about how deep the Bellator light heavyweight division is now that they've added Yoel Romero and Rumble Johnson, but it's deep with 5 decent fighters. It's not deep enough to give someone a real fight that is a top 5 athlete. Does that make sense? So if Ryan Bader isn't fighting Nemkov, Phil Davis, or one of the other two, Yoel Romero or Rumble Johnson, then they're a little bit thin. Unless I'm forgetting someone. Does that make sense? Whereas in the UFC, yeah, 5 for 5, you could potentially see a Bellator, if the top 5 were going to fight the top 5, you could probably see, the Bellator guys maybe winning 3 out of the 5 fights. I'm just throwing numbers out there. But the roster's deeper in the UFC in terms of 10, 15 maybe light heavyweights that are operating at a decent enough level. Bellator don't have that. So, I understand why, or the temptation behind Yoel Romero and Rumble Johnson fighting each other right off the bat, but that's just a UFC fight just happening in Bellator. It's just another one of them fights where they've got 2 guys that used to be in the UFC fighting each other in Bellator. I'd much prefer, if I was, Scott Coker sitting here, I'd much prefer to have both of them fight Bellator guys. Both of them fight guys that have been fighting in Bellator, so we can see if they've still got it. Because if they lose, well, we do have top level talent here. Do you know what I mean? It's a good marker for the incumbent talent. And then if they win, then then they get to fight each other. It's a win-win. That's how I would do it. But yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts on Yoel Romero signing with Bellator. I'm quite happy, to be fair, that Bellator have signed a couple of, known names now, and people that they're not just on, like, I know they're both, old. Yoel is old, and Rumble Johnson is a vet, but they're not way over the hill like other athletes that Bellator have signed in the past. Also, Gegard Mousasi, a guy that has fought at light heavyweight, would he be tempted to go up there and test himself against a Yoel Romero at 205, or even Rumble Johnson at 205? Let me know what you guys think. Put your comments below. Don't be scared to hit the like button if you've enjoyed it. Share it with a friend, and I'll catch you guys next time.